we once again join Nicolas Cage in another adventure into animation. The Croods was originally an Aardman project that gestated at DreamWorks until Aardman and DreamWorks broke up after Flushed Away, Aardman's first CG film. Aardman went on to make a caveman movie called Early Man, but this is about the Croods. So let's get into it. Enter writer-director Kirk D'Amico.
I actually started on the project in 2003, if you could believe it, I started writing it with John Cleese, and that's how John Cleese has a story credit on our film. It was originally intended to be an Aardman animated film when Aardman had a deal with DreamWorks back in the Wallace and Gromit Flushed Away days. And we had developed it for a long time at Bristol and with Aardman, and then Aardman and DreamWorks decided to get divorced, and Jeffrey took the baby in the divorce. So he and the attorneys wanted to keep Croods part of the settlement, which he did. And so I was just the writer at that point, and so it's kind of laid fallow for it, just sat around for a while. Obviously, when it was being done at Aardman, we were talking about a movie that'd be on about 2 or 3 different sets, much like Chicken Run, much like Wallace and Gromit. So the scale and the scope was a lot different, and the tone of the comedy was much different. It was much more quirky, Aardman, John Cleese, Monty Python. It was much more absurdist and surreal when it came to the comedy. But the idea, there was no family involved. It was mostly the story of two, one like a grug and what became Guy, his name was Wimmet in our versions. That was the only one. But there was an Eep and there was all the characters. But it was more about a town that was sort of like a backwards caveman village that was turned upside down by this newcomer that was embracing the future. So it very much had a lot to do with John's personal anxieties about technology in the future and how it ruins everything. So, and it had much more of a British, obviously, because of Aardman quality. And then Aardman ended up making Early Man. So I imagine they still loved the caveman trope as well.
Meanwhile, director Chris Sanders was coming off the success of Lilo and Stitch, but had moved on from Disney after creative differences on Bolt. Here's director Chris Sanders.
It mostly came from just difficulties we were having with American Dog, which is the film I was working on after Lilo and Stitch. And we just had, I would say that the simplest way to explain it would be, we definitely had some creative differences about the direction of the film. So I didn't see myself continuing to direct successfully at that time at Disney.
And then Chris Sanders, I got news at some point. I got a call. I don't know what I was working on. I think I was still working there, but I got a call that Chris Sanders was coming over to DreamWorks and he was interested in the Caveman movie. So I remember meeting Chris. I was already a big fan of his, but I met him off campus because it was like a whole. He wasn't yet out of his contract, whatever. So I had to meet him in an undisclosed location. And we just started talking, hit it off, and I was going to write, and he had ideas for how he wanted to shape the film. And then we started working together. So that's the backstory to when Chris came on board for the first time.
I moved over to DreamWorks, started working on the Croods development, and I was on Croods development for about a year. And they spend a great deal of time. You spend more time than you would maybe imagine on these films before you even get into production, doing things, really outlining the film. We spend a great deal of time outlining the film. So we were in outlines on the Croods for about a year.
Yeah, well, when Chris came on, he had some ideas about where he wanted to take the Caveman movie, and I was a writer, so I was excited, and we just started working on it. And over time, we just kept developing the story, and then we were headed in one direction. And then when he went off to do How to Train Your Dragon in 2008, I was moved up to. He said, "Well, why don't you carry the torch for a while?" And I became a director. And it's during that time that I kind of said maybe it should be about a family, and I ran over to Chris's department over at Dragon and pitched it to him, and he's like, "I love that idea." So we sort of set off on that being the new direction of the film, that it was about one family going on a journey. to find a new home. That's kind of how we centered it.
And I was approached by Bill Damashki to take a look at this other film, Dragons. I think I did have a little bit of concern about it, but everybody just gave me a verbal guarantee that it was going to be waiting for me when I finished up, and it did move along. There was still development to be done on it, and I was aware of it and would weigh in when I could on that development, and so it did proceed a bit, and then when we finished How to Train Your Dragon, it was ready and waiting to proceed. It's interesting because the situation on Dragons was not unlike the situation on American Dog, where they were thinking about changing directions with the film. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to jump onto that film and take over the direction of that film. Now, the neat thing about that was that I was also transitioning from traditional animation into CG. And by jumping onto How to Train Your Dragon, I really got a crash course in all things CG as far as production. And because that film had already built characters, they'd already built backgrounds, layouts, etc. We were going to modify them. We were going to make some changes, but I didn't have to start from scratch. So I really just jumped right into the middle of all that. So I got my education in CG by working on How to Train Your Dragon. And after completing that film, I rolled back onto the Croods with a much better handle on how to start that one. When I arrived on it, Kirk D'Amico was already there doing some writing, and he'd been writing on it for quite some time. And I understood it just to be what it was when I saw it for the first time. And it wasn't until I'd been there at least a month before somebody or something pointed out to me that it was an Aardman film. And I'm like, wait, what? And as the Aardman film, it was quite different. And I can't even remember the different. There were multiple incarnations of the Aardman version. Golly, some of them were almost like sports related. It was a caveman sports, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Right. Yeah. And so that's one of those weird things. Like, and I never saw that version. It might have been amazing. It seems that would be a great example of like you have one too many things, I think, together. Is it a soccer movie or is it a caveman movie? And caveman soccer seems like a bit much, but like I said, I'm not going to say it didn't work. I didn't see it. Maybe it was amazing. And it could be hilarious. Caveman golf. You say, well, caveman golf, I'd tune in to see that. So I want to see cavemen. The cavemen are interesting for a lot of reasons. And one of the things we did, and this is something that I always do now before I start a project, is I write down on a piece of paper a list of things that if I was an audience member, I would hope to see should I go see this film. And we wrote down, okay, in a caveman film, what things would you like to see? And what would you be disappointed that you didn't see? And so you write down all these things, like you want to see like giant animals, you want to see volcanoes, you want to see earthquakes, you want to see landslides, you want to see tar, so you write down all these things. And it's not, I think, silly to do that. I think it's a great idea that like, okay, if you're going to see a film about a horse, like what things do you want to see? Like, well, you want to see a horse like jump a ravine, it's like, I want to see that. I want to see this. I want to see. Like, don't disappoint people. Like, oh, I went to see a caveman film and none of them ever fell off a cliff. Like they were never chased by lava. Like, well, you want to see lava. So it's one of the first things we did was make a list of things that we would expect to see should we go see the film. And we made sure that we included as many of them as we could.
Tonight we'll hear the story of Crispy Bear. A long time ago, this little bear was alive. She was alive because she listened to her father and lived her life in routine and darkness and terror. So she was happy.
Nick Cage was a really interesting choice because we needed to find a voice and a character. Grug is immediately in a position where he's saying no, no, no to everything. He's terrified of everything. His lifestyle and his motto is never not be afraid.
But Crispy had one terrible problem. She was filled with curiosity. Yes. And one day, while she was in a tree, the curious little bear wanted to climb to the top. And no sooner than she climbed to the top, she saw something new and died.
Just like that?
Yes. Her last moments of terror still frozen on her face.
Same ending as every day.
I get it, Dad. I get it. I will never do anything new or different.
Good man, Thunk.
So he's such a negative character. We had to find an actor who can be incredibly negative but still super likable. And Roy Scheider and Nicolas Cage are two actors that can say things like that, like don't do this, don't do that. And they seem more damaged and put upon than you do. You know, like Nicolas Cage telling you not to do this. That's the great thing about Nicolas Cage is he just feels so sympathetic even when he's being upset about things. There was a sequence from The Weatherman where he's talking about bow hunting and archery, and he's just so upset as he's saying these things that he never loses. He never stops being sympathetic.
What interested you when you thought about archery? When you wanted to do it?
I don't know. Going hunting or something.
Hunting?
Yeah.
For animals?
Yeah.
You want to shoot animals with arrows?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, to kill them.
But that's not archery, that's hunting. That's called bow hunting. That's what you wanted to do, bow hunting?
Yeah, I saw it on TV.
Well, I don't really want to kill animals with arrows, so that's not going to happen. We can target shoot, Shelley.
It's not fun.
It's a lot of fun. You have to apply yourself.
Targets don't move.
Well, you know, Shelley, you haven't really hit one yet.
You should support me.
I do support you. I support.
When we pitched it to Nicolas Cage, oh my God.
When we first met him, we were flying on Jeffrey's plane, and it was me, Chris, our producer, and a couple other people, and other people from DreamWorks, a few other people from DreamWorks. And we flew because Nick was shooting in New Orleans. While we were ending up going, we were supposed to be going to New York as a crew with Jeffrey. And there was a massive blizzard moving into New York. So when we got to New Orleans, I remember landed on the tarmac, and we weren't supposed to get off the plane because we were not cleared to get off the plane. And all of a sudden, Nick came driving across the tarmac like in some big SUV, and it was, I swear, it was like out of a movie.
Three black SUVs came out. Jeffrey told everybody on the jet to go into one of the back rooms, and just Kirk and I were there. Just Kirk, myself, and Jeffrey. And the door opened, the ramp went down, and a black SUV stops. The door opens. Nicolas Cage gets out. He comes up the stairs with his sunglasses on, and he's so nice, and he walks on board the jet, and we offer him pizza, and we pitch him the movie. And
I remember Nick was so kind, and he was just like, "Okay, tell me what to do." And we started pitching them, and we were showing him pictures. And you know, he's a loving father, and he's a guy who loves his family, and he works really hard wants to protect them. He understood those emotions, and he was just like, "Sign me up. What do I do to sign up?" And then I remember it was so great because we were all elated, and Jeffrey was kind of like, "Well, do you want to, do you want to know more about this or that?" He just wanted to know about his character, candidly. Like, he's like, kind of like, you guys will figure out that. I just want to know about who I'm playing, right? And which I thought was awesome. And then I remember Nick was very concerned about us flying to New York in the blizzard. Like, he was like, I'm worried. You guys got to get off the ground. That blizzard's coming in. I'm concerned about you. And I remember Jeffrey was like, "Yeah, but let's have some pizza." And he's like, "No, you guys should get going." And so there was this moment where we had this thing, and that, it was like we're counting the clock, but yet we had to break bread with Nick. So it was a really fascinating thing, but he was so genuine, and he just loved it. And that was the way he was in everything. He would just want to know where we were with the character, what we asked of him, what we wanted, and how he could play. And that was the cool thing about it. He had never, in his animated feature work, he hadn't done a movie like that with kind of the way we do it as directors. And he really enjoyed wanting to play with his performance. So that was a big part of it. When he asked us, I remember at that first meeting, like, he was intrigued by, like, he's like, "This sounds fun." So, yeah, that was it. It was quite a memorable moment.
He was amazing. From the very first time we recorded him, we flew out to, and we never recorded him in the same place twice. He was always on the move, always in different places.
Every time you met Nick, he was so impressive and such an interesting guy. I felt like I was meeting him anew. It was like a different Nick. Like he would come into our lives. It was amazing because we recorded him in like 20 different cities. So every time we'd come in, it was him, but it was different. And I remember he said something along the lines of, what was it in my aura that made you think that I could play such a troglodyte? And I'll never forget he said troglodyte and aura in the same sentence. I was like, oh my gosh, I love you. You're the most amazing man. And so we were like, well, that's just the way it starts, and we're going to get someplace. And he was totally down with it. He's like, I'll go there. Don't worry about it. But like, what are you looking for? And me, he's so aware of, he so wanted, like I said, the coolest thing is he just wanted to play. Like he said that, in live action, people are waiting. There's a lot of people waiting around and you have to get the shot. And we were like, no, we're here for 4 hours. We have to do, let's do 40, 50 lines, whatever the amount of lines we have to do for the day. And if you want to range around and try completely different performances, go for it. And I think he really enjoyed that. And so he was constantly searching, like for different tones, it was like it's like watching a musician, honestly. It's like watching a musician try to find. He was constantly looking for different tones in his performance to find this character. And we just, honestly, sometimes me and Chris would just be in the audience of it. We would just start him and let him go and not slow him down because he had so much momentum. And then he'd find something, and almost invariably at the end, he'd be like, oh, there's so much in there. There's probably nothing. Maybe there's something you guys could use, but I just wanted to give it to you. Like, that's what he was. He was just so giving. That was what we loved about him, among other things.
So he's really interesting. He is such a cool guy because he is a curious person. He's curious about the world. He's curious about stuff around him. He pays incredible attention to things. I really saw him as a kindred spirit because if you brought up like shrunken heads, he'd want to talk about it. And he'd say, oh, I saw a shrunken head and this and that, Far from being like a difficult person or a strange person, he was completely the opposite. He was really together, incredibly focused, an incredibly hard worker, and absolutely friendly and fascinating. I'm such a Nicolas Cage fan, especially after having worked with him. Yes, I have nothing but great things to say about him and would work with him again in a heartbeat. We got to hang out for a little bit in Berlin as we were doing a promotional tour, and we were in Berlin, and we actually got to hang out and talk one night. And I think it's really one of the few, if only, times I've ever really done that with somebody. And it was just it was so relaxed and fun to just chat with him. One of the things we did talk about, he was at the time, he had been to Stonehenge a few times and he would talk about the vicinity. Again, that's one of the things that's really fun to talk to him about because I felt like I was talking to somebody that might be hanging out in a museum, because those are where Jess and I, those are our people who hang out in museums, because these are people who are curious. They're smart and they're curious, and they're curious about the world and they're open to ideas and stuff. And that's the thing I thought was so neat about Nicolas Cage, is that he was very curious and very open to ideas, and you could talk to him about whatever. We recorded him in the Bahamas, which was interesting because the recording studio that and he was down in the Bahamas. He had a house there, I believe. We never saw his house or went to his house. I don't even think his house was necessarily on the island that we were on, but we arrived in the Bahamas and we weren't able to record him in a studio because one of the two people who I believe owned the studio had been murdered. They'd been murdered not that long ago. And so the people who ran the studio were, in a sense, in hiding, so they weren't going to go back to the studio. So we recorded in one of the guys' houses, which was not soundproofed. It had a tin roof. It had an air conditioner. It had a clock running. And we went there the night before, and there was a rainstorm, and you couldn't even hear yourself yell inside the house. It was so not soundproofed. The next day there was no storms, and Nicolas Cage came by, and we just simply had to shut everything off that made any sort of a sound. Clocks, any electrical devices, but that included the air conditioning. So we shut off the air conditioner while we recorded in this house with a tin roof in a blazing sunny day that just got hotter and hotter and hotter. And and that's where I learned to drink Red Bull, sugar-free Red Bulls, because that's what Nicolas Cage was drinking to keep himself as cool as possible. But by the end of the recording session, he had a white shirt that was so drenched with sweat, like you could see right through it. But he just was such a trooper, and we would have to stop recording if we heard like a scooter coming or even a bird singing outside. We had to stop recording.
You know, his thing is he's not going to play if you have the piano, he's not going to play the song right in the middle. You know what I mean? He's going to do it way down the bottom or way up at the top, knowing that I don't think he ever thought we'd even use that. But I think it's more like I said, I think it's more of an actor just testing the range of where they could put it and place it. One of those screens where he's like, oh, you want it more? He's like, oh, so you want full David Lee Roth? I'm like, oh, yeah, we want full David Lee Roth. Oh, like he did that really high. And I remember I was I tell you, listening to what I'm talking about. Like I can remember it, like we were just like an audience. Like I was like, oh my gosh, it's like better than just, it's like David, he's also evoking David Lee Roth. This guy, who could be better? But yeah, it was like everything but the leg kick he did. And so it was that great high note that he hits in it. And he had those primal screams and Release the Baby. He just, you know, he gives and gives, and he's fearless, obviously. That's what everyone loves about him. But yeah, those are, and just like the fun and like, you know, and how he would then transition, like that would be done and be like just back to Nick. It was really, that's the amazing part of his talent. I imagine is what everyone must say to you, is his ability to stretch and then return back. You know, like if I had to do that, I would be like the rubber band that broke. You know what I mean? I would never come back. So that's amazing because he knew, okay, I read this. Everyone can read this and go, the expected take is this. And he's like, I'm not going to give you the expected take. So he's going to try all these other variations. And the other thing is he's such a great improviser, and his memory and his recall of things is astonishing. And I mean, just not even like, even just the way he places the lines, they're recalling memories. It's really an amazing thing to watch. He's an amazing actor. And, you know, Mel Blanc is one of his heroes. I'm sure that's in interviews. I'm not speaking unless I've misremembered, but like he loves, like, so the voice acting part of making a voice is something that he asked about. Like, is that what you guys want? And we were just like, no, we want you. So it wasn't about creating a voice as much as it was like finding, and, you know, obviously it's not his natural, but it's like the idea of it was, you know, we wanted it to be emotional. We wanted it to connect with the audience, so we didn't want too much artifice around it. There's so much of it that is really the way, you know, he would respond, especially when frustrated Greg, which was most of the film. I feel like that's a place where that's pure Nick, you know, like that the way he's charmingly frustrated, I find, and sort of condescending to the Ryan Reynolds character in a way that just makes me laugh. And one of my favorite ones is where they're at the base of the tree, and where Catherine Keener's character comes down and she says, "But Guy says," and Nick Grug says, he goes, "Oh Guy says, oh Guy." I do that all the time. Like whenever anyone says anything, oh, but this person, oh Guy, oh, I love it so much. It's become a thing that I do. I do it with my kids all the time. Like, oh, your brother said, oh, like, so like it's so condescending, but I enjoy it. You know what? There's moments of the things that I know that, you know, he would speak to, and I don't know, but like I know there was memories in there of his own dad, and there was memories of moments in his life that he would refer to, that I watched him refer to. So I think that I wouldn't know if it's a person, but I feel like that's the way I mean, you know, I think that that's his brilliance, is that he's constantly drawing on this deep well of memories that he can access and then, you know, use. I'm not an actor, so, but I mean, use as an inspiration, either for the tone of the performance or actually, you know, the line read. I don't really know where he's drawing from. Obviously, I'm not, but I do know that, like I say, he's constantly drawing on this deep well of memories that he has. He has an incredible memory. He would say things like, "Oh, this was happening when I was this or that." Like, it's really, I think he has a musicality that is what drives his performances. And I think that's what I loved about the animation thing, was that it wasn't about the physical performance. So he really concentrate on like the one instrument, which was his voice, like almost like a singer, it's like, that's what it comes down to, is that I think he enjoyed, because, obviously music is there, and he enjoyed that it was only worrying about the musicality of the line reads, and not about where he was standing, what he was looking like, who's he looking at, all those other things that go into being an actor. This was just like, it's just about the singing, it's just about what we put on the track. So I think that was kind of fun for him.
So it was really fun to watch him record, because he's just a lot of fun. He could take a line really far, but it was never something we couldn't put in the film.
Let's ask that ugly lady if she's seen Dad.
Huh?
Haven't seen him.
Wow! What are you doing?
Yeah, wow. I was up all night because, all these ideas just kept coming to me.
Is that a snake?
Belt! New and improved. Ow! It's even self-tightening! Ow!
And that would be one that was just really fun to record, because he could just let loose and be, I call them shades. Like, it's so ready-made for him to deliver those lines. And there's always a little percentage of Elvis in some of those deliveries.
I call it a rug, rhymes with grug. And this one, I call it a ride, rhymes with grug.
That doesn't rhyme.
It's gonna get us places faster than shoes. Yeah!
He was dressed, he looked so like, he was like going to the Oscars. He was like, so, it was like really amazing. And so he came in, and then we're like, okay, now you have to do this super hippie scene, right? And so it was kind of interesting, because he came in this, beautiful suit and, ready for a night on the town. And then he had to do this sort of like, hepcat kind of, I think it was more like a hepcat than a stoner. Like, it was more of like a jazzy vibe. He was working, again, I think it's the musician in him, so I think like that, it was more of a hepcat. And that one, just, oh my gosh, like tomorrow, like all that stuff. And, that one, honestly, the funny thing is me and Chris loved it. The animators hated it. They were like, no, we're not going to do this. You guys are ruining the movie. This doesn't even sound like him. And we're like, yeah, but if he's going through a midlife crisis, it's like, this guy's having a nervous breakdown. It's okay to be a little ridiculous, like, that's what happened. And so I remember us having these fights with the animators who didn't want us to put it in the movie. But it was like, it was such a fun color for him. And then the fun thing is just seeing the rest of the family's reaction to your dad. And it was like, it's like your dad comes back with a Corvette, it's like, why? What do you all of a sudden, like, it's like the ultimate midlife crisis. It's like, gold chains and a Corvette or something, it's like, what are you doing? Like, that to me, it gives to both of us. I don't know, maybe it was just our lives that it spoke to all three of us, but it spoke to Nick, Chris, and me. So we ran with it. And I still think it's funny.
Where do you get these great ideas?
Since I don't have a brain, they're coming from my stomach, down deep below, and then up again into my mind. See, I got ideas. I got thoughts. Like this. I call it a mobile home. Isn't that something?
Because the studio, it was weird. The studio reacted very, very negatively to us ever saying that the Croods were kind of dumb. And they were like, they're not stupid, they're not dumb. And they got really upset with us. And we're like, well, it's not a bad thing. Like, you can't really make a character unappealing by making them kind of slow. Like you think about Homer Simpson, who is, practically, he's practically non-functional. He's so stupid sometimes, but he's so appealing. And so finally, Kirk said, what we're going to say is, we're not going to say they're stupid. We're going to say they have beginner's minds. And we said, great. We were in a meeting, and he said, the Croods have beginner's minds. And suddenly, it was like a log jam that just suddenly broke loose. And we could do whatever we wanted. We could make the Croods as dopey as we wanted to make them, and we always said they have beginner's minds, and everybody was okay with it. So it was one of those weird, and I'd say frustrating things where you're like, why is this a problem? They're cavemen. Have you ever seen a movie with cavemen? Cavemen are appealing because they struggle with things. It's like calling somebody a caveman. It is suggesting that they're stubborn, that they are a bit slow-witted, etc. And that's appealing. That's not unappealing. And the thing we could never convince them of was it's okay. It's okay. The audience will find this appealing. It's not. So we did nothing differently that we were ever doing. But we just, when we explained that they had beginners' minds, the studio then was suddenly okay with that. So. The thing that I'm so proud about that film is that the overall message was just risk is a part of life. And for that character to get to the point where he's like this guy who was like, he puts his family in a cave every night, shuts the door, and they, 90% of their lives are, spent in the dark, not coming into contact with anything. For him to get to the point where he took his family and threw them literally into the unknown as to give them a chance to survive was a great story. One of the things I will say about Nicolas Cage that maybe is not that well known is that we would frequently run into him at recording studios where he would be working on ADR for a film that was getting set to be released. And I would say that Nicolas Cage is better at ADR than anybody else I've ever seen. And ADR is tough because you have to, like, in animation, you record the voices and you animate to that voice, to the frame counts of the vowels and syllables in the recording. So to have an actor come back later and re-record a line and have it fit, it's not the easiest thing. But he could do it first try. His ADR is, and not only could he match the line timing-wise, but he could match the line and enhance the performance at the same time. That is extremely impressive.